It turns out the Dolphins didn't make it through their trip to Chicago totally unscathed, with the news this afternoon that one of their running backs is out for the year.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. Here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Today on the show, really unfortunate news came out around lunchtime. It's about 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as I'm recording this. Was going to hold off, was going to do the film study of the starters and then do like all 22 observations and notes and do that for this afternoon show after we did a post-game show yesterday afternoon. But with this news for Alexander Mattison, I figured this was an appropriate time for us to have this conversation. And it sucks. It's the inevitable part of football is the injuries. And you've heard more than one Dolphins player and more than one person around the Dolphins, whether it's Mike McDaniel or Chris Greer. You play long enough, the injury rate is 100%. Alexander Mattison is out for the year with neck surgery that he reportedly underwent yesterday in Chicago. So let's walk through what happened and his injury and what happened for Alexander Mattison, because him as the person, it's obviously the most important thing. And he is expected to make a full recovery, which is good. But he has this opportunity with a catch and run. He gets down inside the red zone. And as he's tackled, he kind of does like a somersault. And I didn't realize this because you didn't get a great look at it because the broadcast was too busy interviewing Roma Dunze on NFL Network. But I'm not going to sit here and bludgeon the Chicago home broadcast for another show. We did that last night, if you had to sit through that. The Madison's down on the field for an extended period of time. I didn't realize Mike McDaniel came out and checked on him. But you could see in some of the images that have been posted of Madison on the field where he's shaken up. Mike McDaniel's out on the field. He eventually gets up, walks off onto his own power. Mike McDaniel in the post game shares that Alexander Mattison is dealing with neck and shoulder soreness, but he's not in concussion protocol. But then Adam Schefter this morning, the news breaks that Madison's going to be out for the year. Adam Schefter reports that Madison was transported from the stadium to a local hospital via ambulance and had surgery on his neck in Chicago. So that obviously changes the perspective of kind of lands awkwardly on his head, neck, shoulder, walks off on his own. You would assume maybe you don't want to assume anything, but you would assume there's a serious situation structurally with what is obviously a very important area for your body and functionality for him to that day, that afternoon, undergo surgery. So he is, again, expected to make a full recovery. That is first and foremost the most important thing. But it's a brutal break for a guy who has looked surprisingly sturdy. I mean, and there's been times in years past where I follow the league close enough to know that Alexander Mattison has gotten the opportunities that he has in the NFL between 180 carries in his last year in Minnesota, 132 carries with the Raiders last year. None of these carries are particularly effective. He hasn't averaged more than 3.9 yards a carry since 2020 when he was the change of pace guy with Dalvin Cook. He gets these opportunities because he's a smart football player. He's a tough player. You can block him for 3 and he'll get you 4.5. You can block him for 5 and he'll get you 5.5, right? He's going to get what's available. He's going to make good reads. He's a tough runner. He runs physical, but not necessarily from an athletic profile standpoint, like a transcendent player that becomes your workhorse piece, but he gets these opportunities because he's a smart, tough, hard-nosed player. And he comes in obviously with a 4-year stretch of 3.7, 3.8, 3.9, and 3.2. And the Raiders offense last year was horrible, right? So you take it for face value. But yards per carry, not a lot of efficient carries. And then he looks and he's popping some runs and he's showcasing consistency. And you obviously have the optimism of what the starting offensive line can look like from a run game perspective based off the investments at guard. And Patrick Paul is a year 2 player, is a starter who looks outstanding, and getting Austin Jackson back for the start of the regular season. Like, wasn't quite sure how it was going to look, but you felt like Madison was well on his way to earning the trust of this staff to have a prominent role to play in the backfield. Not to be the featured player, not to be the best back, not to be the bell cow, not to touch the ball 300 times, anything like that, but to be a prominent role player within the Dolphins' offensive backfield. It looked like he was going to be primed to have that kind of opportunity as a player who needed that kind of opportunity. You know, I mean, he's last year was his age 26 season. He turned 27 in June. He's kind of at that point for running backs where, you know, you start asking how many more contracts, how many more years of your prime before you start slowing down. And then a break like this, it's just a really crappy part of the business of the game of football for a preseason contest to have a development like this for a player who's very easy to root for when you talk to him, very easy to root for when you hear him speak, very easy to root for as far as the style of play in which he plays, while you understand like there's some limitations, but it's a guy you want to see be successful. And he's now out for the year with neck surgery yesterday in Chicago. We want to talk a little bit about where the Dolphins go from here. The unfortunate part of this as well is the show's going to roll on. That's the nature of the beast in the NFL. So what do the Dolphins have in their backfield? There's been a report already for a workout for a free agent player in Detroit. We're going to get into all that next here on Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back in full swing. This year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. Locked On Dolphins is playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout the month of August. To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team each and every week is eliminated until there's just one team left standing. With the season around the corner, and now is the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can still play in head-to-head league, private leagues, or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. So here's where the Dolphins now stand with their backfield and all of this. They have 3 running backs now on the active roster for the 90-man roster. It's Devon Achane, Jalen Wright, Ollie Gordon. A lot of youth. You got a 3rd-round pick in 23. You got a 4th-round pick in 24. You got a 6th-round pick in 25. That's it. Obviously, Devon Achane is a prominent player for your offense. Jalen Wright, they bet on big when they gave up a future 3 to get a 4 to go get Jalen Wright, now going into year 2. Very important piece for Miami. Excited to get into the All-22 and kind of assess what he looked like against Chicago intimately. Obviously, you had the opportunities to punch the low red zone run in. Didn't happen. But why did all of those plays in intimate detail not happen? And then Ollie Gordon looked good yesterday for sure. The question for Ollie is, as a rookie coming from the Big 12, you see the physicality elements of his game. He had a home run hitting ability in 2023. How ready can he get and how fast in a complex offense? These are the kinds of questions that you have that I could very easily say, hey, if I'm going to project the best for Ollie Gordon, I think the Dolphins are going to be fine. If you could project for health and Jalen Wright and Ollie Gordon, Devon Achane, you have enough in your backfield. And I would say that's probably true, where you have Achane is a really good 1st and 10 back and obviously a really good passing down back. And you have Jalen Wright with all of the upside and between the tackle home run hitting ability that he has. And then you have Ollie Gordon, who can be a thud runner and thud through the sense of how the Chicago Bears and their practice demeanor defines thud as compared to thud from a typical joint practice standpoint. But 3's pretty thin. Like most teams usually have another. So I think that's where for Miami, it is inevitable, especially with 2 weeks of the preseason left. You got to bring somebody in who, A, is hungry for some carries and is willing to take them late in games. And maybe you give them to Ollie Gordon because you want to onboard Ollie Gordon. But you don't want to ramp up the wear and tear on the guys you're going to carry into the season. And if you have 3 running backs for 3-4 weeks left to practice, that's a lot of extra reps for each one of those 3 guys as compared to having another name. So I think there's an inevitability because of the numbers on the roster. There is a running back signing that is going to come off of this. It's a question of whether or not the visit that the Dolphins had today is the player that they sign. And we'll find out probably in 2 hours, shortly after I hit post on this podcast, probably is because it would be announced at 4:00 because that's when they'll formally announce the transaction of Madison presumably going on injured reserve, season-ending injured reserve at 4:00. I would assume that happens today. And it's a question of, do they have something lined up with Jamaal Williams, who is the running back who was here was here for the workout today? That was reported this morning. Or is there somebody else that they end up calling? Nate Noel, who started camp with the Dolphins, but in the midst of the bottom of the roster churn, is now with the Colts. So he's not available to have like a callback and be like, hey, Nate, come back for the next 3 weeks. Let's see how you do. Maybe get a practice squad spot. He's with the Colts right now. So you can't just do the callback to the guy that spent some time with you in the summer. He signed with the Colts. Of course he did. I just realized that. But with Alec Ingold down, with now Alexander Mattison out, with what you have at the tight end position where Darren Waller's still not going, although that may come soon based off what Mike McDaniel said last week, there's some spots where maybe you're going to be a little bit more 11 personnel heavy for the next couple of weeks, unless you get Darren Waller activated and start working with him and you sign another running back, in which case you could kind of say, okay, let's collectively take a deep breath. Question really for me is whether or not they want to sign somebody that is a snap sponge for the preseason. If they want to treat Ollie Gordon like the snap sponge for the preseason because they want to get him up to speed, or whether or not they want somebody who, if they felt Madison was very clearly going to have a defined role and they don't know that Ollie Gordon's capable of taking it, do they sign somebody with an intent to, hey, we expect you to be on the 53 and have a role? And I think some of the names that are available out there with the finances attached to what their most recent contracts are could maybe give you some indication of what direction they ultimately choose to go. Because Jamaal Williams, for example, he's an older player as far as running backs go. He's 30 or what he turned 30 in April. He played last year on a 3-year deal for New Orleans, the second year of a 3-year deal at $4 million a piece. So he played through the 2 years with guaranteed money and then was out with New Orleans. If you're signing it back for $4 million, I'd be stunned, given the fact that you got these corners and Jack Jones and Mike Hilton. They signed vet minimum deals, right? So I think all the writing on the wall is, if one of these guys is going to sit here and hold out for what they played for on their most recent contract, it might put you into a different stratosphere of what names are available. And then maybe that player turns into the guy who takes all the snaps in the second half of preseason games. Right. But I want to get into who is left. There's a few names that are interesting for varying degrees of reasons. So we're going to get into that next here on Locked on Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. So we've all been there, logging on early, waiting for forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot on a show that you've been dying to see. Then you don't get in. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as you get closer to showtime, so you can save up to 60% off with killer last-minute deals. So if you're tired of endless scrolling trying to find the best deal, use Game Time. They've got zone deals that pick the best seats in your section for you, and they even offer you panoramic sight lines so you can see what your sight line looks like from the seats before you hit buy. And you have all-in pricing, so there's no surprise fees when you put the tickets into your cart. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account. Use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, create an account. Redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets with the lowest prices, guaranteed. All right. So, who's left? Jamaal Williams, player in on the visit. It's not been a very fruitful 2 years in New Orleans for Jamaal Williams. And the fall off has been brilliant because the last year he was in Detroit, he led the league in rushing touchdowns with 17. Now, he had 262 carries for 1,066 yards and 17 touchdowns, splitting time in the backfield, averaged 4.1 yards per carry. The last 2 years combined, he has 2 rushing touchdowns. And he has 470 rushing yards in 2 years in New Orleans. He averaged 3.1 yards per carry in those 2 years in New Orleans. A little bit of a different life experience when you're running in New Orleans with bad quarterbacks and shaky offensive lines and skill groups that are often banged up than playing in Detroit, right? And that's the Dolphins faced Jamaal Williams that year he was in Detroit with those 17 rushing touchdowns. I don't think the numbers are a perfect indication of what Jamaal has, and certainly is a later stage running back who's 30 years old and has not been productive in this will be 3 seasons removed from a productive season for him. I think it's fair to question, what he has left in the tank. I would also point out Alexander Mattison had some of the same questions, right? So I hear the name Jamaal Williams. Do I think he can be the same kind of player if the blocking looks like what you think and hope it will in a specialized role? Yeah, I think Jamaal Williams can be that. I think Zach Moss is another name to watch. Zach Moss, most recently with the Bengals, he was cut, I believe it was this summer was when he got cut loose, but Moss is kind of pinballed around the league a little bit. He came into the league in 2020. He was a third round pick by the Bills, 86th overall. He's from South Florida. He played college football at Utah. Cousins for Santana and Sinroyce Moss had his best year in 2023 when Jonathan Taylor was banged up. He had 183 carries for 794 yards, averaged 4.3 yards per pop in Indy. He was traded in 22 from Buffalo to Indy and had pretty productive running opportunities that year where, he went 70 after getting traded to the Colts. He had 76 carries for 365 yards. This is another big, dense, powerful player, 5'10", 215. Right. So I think that's the fact that they brought in Jamaal at 6 foot 224. And Madison was a player that was kind of built similarly at 5'11", 220. And then you have Zach Moss as another piece of that puzzle, as another 220 plus player. Writing's on the wall here, right? Of wanting a powerful player. It's a question of, do we envision this being a specific role, or is this somebody that we're looking to bridge and hope that Ollie Gordon can take the opportunities? Now, he was not good last year in Cincinnati. He only played in 8 games, averaged 3.3 yards per carry. But we've talked about this on the program before. That Bengals rushing offense, it's about as vanilla as it gets. because they want to pass the ball a ton. They've averaged, I don't think, higher than 4.1 yards per carry in any year in the last 4 years, whether that's with Zach Moss or Chase Brown or Joe Mixon or anybody else. So I don't look at the raw numbers there and lose a lot of sleep in the way of the lack of production for Zach Moss. Beyond those three, Jeff Wilson just signed in San Francisco yesterday. Kind of sounded like the bridge was kind of burned with the fact that they didn't use him at all last year. So even if Jeff Williams was out on the market, I would not have picked him to be a player that got run back. But Zach Moss and Jamaal Williams, they're both of their previous contracts were in that $4 million per year range. If they think they can get that elsewhere, it may price them out of Miami, which leaves names like Chris Evans, who was a player who didn't get a lot of run or opportunities in Cincinnati out of Michigan, or Donta Foreman, who's most recently in Cleveland and played on vet minimum, or Josh Kelly, who's 28, but is another bigger player at the position. 5'11", 219 is what he's listed at, was another vet minimum player. So you have kind of this collection of, well, these are guys that had meaningful roles and opportunities elsewhere, but were paid like it, versus, well, these are snap absorbers for you to get you through a stretch of time, which is what I would consider Josh Kelly, Donta Foreman, Chris Evans, Mike Boone. These are all minimum players. Gus Edwards is kind of a player that's in between the two. So that's what's out there for the Dolphins. The fact that Williams gets the first call, I don't know if that's because Williams had played in Detroit and is local to Detroit, and the Dolphins happened to be in Detroit. Like, I don't know what the circumstances are, and that was the first name that they could call because they traveled last night from Chicago to Detroit, and Madison got left behind because he had to have surgery. And it's like, hey, who's around? Who can we work out this morning? Oh, Jamaal, get him in here. Like, I don't know if that's the case or not. I would not be mad if Jamaal Williams was your signing. I don't think I'd be mad if any of these guys were your signing, whether it's Zach Moss, or Jamaal Williams, or Gus Edwards, who I think is probably the least attractive fit from a skill set perspective for what we're talking about, or one of the younger guys, or one of the lower level guys. Josh Kelly, Donta Foreman, Chris Evans, Mike Boone. Just kind of would tell me what they're feeling for Ollie Gordon, I think, more than anything. So sending best thoughts to Alexander Mattison in his recovery. This is obviously an unfortunate pivot. And anytime it's like neck or like that just gets scary. So glad to hear he has a full recovery expected for him on his road ahead. Wishing him the absolute best. And we'll see what the Dolphins choose to end up doing here for their strategy, because make no mistake about it, there is a need to add another running back at this stage. Kyle Krabs, keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always for checking out the show. Make it a good rest of your Monday. I'll be back again tomorrow. Talk a little bit more Dolphins football with all of you. And until then, fins up.